Good morning. All right, we have sound, so that's a good thing. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Miss Jennifer. I'm going to figure out how to get the SNL theme, and we're going to do a whole Friday Night Live. See if I can break out some new skills. Good morning. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. I hope you had a nice evening. It was a busy one for me. I had to go home and work on a few things for today. Get myself prepped for my edge-to-edge quilting class. I had to do some breakfast club prep. So no watching TV last night. It was actually peace and quiet. Yes, it is a chilly morning. The heat in the Bernina studio area has decided it doesn't want to work. So we are a little chilly over here this morning. Yes, good morning, everybody. Oh, it's too funny, Miss Kathy. Always on the same wavelength. Well, that's good, Miss Jennifer. As long as you're prepped, that's all I ask for. I don't care when it gets done, just as long as it's done. Yes. Good morning, everybody. We're going to welcome to Breakfast Club this morning. Yes, Mom, that means we need to go home. We don't have any heat at the cold store, so we need to go home. No, it just means I'm going to have chilly hands over here today. It's okay. You'll just have to keep me active. So today we're going to talk about Pintucks, and not just Pintucks. I'm going to talk about what a Pintuck is, but a Pintuck also requires a double needle. So that is another technique that does have a somewhat special way of being threaded and things like that. And then depending upon the machine will depend upon some things. So let's get started because that's always fun. And then I'll put my face up here so you feel like you're not sitting in a class lecture, but actually can see me. Good morning. All right. So what is a Pintuck? Okay, so if you're not familiar with the term or the sewing technique, basically a Pintuck is a simple tuck of fabric, okay? Stitched in place, okay? Sometimes they can be folded and pressed without stitching, so you can actually make like a folded Pintuck, and it's more of a tuck than a Pintuck. But you can do folded and ironed tucks that can then be stitched down. It is purely a decorative function. There is no sewing function at all with a Pintuck. It's just decorative, okay? And it is not the same as a dart, although it can look like a dart. But a dart is actually used to create shape in the garment, whereas a Pintuck is really meant to remain flat and just to add an additional embellishment. Okay, so the first thing we need to talk about are the need for presser feet. Okay, because can't do a Pintuck without the right foot. And we just can't have one. Okay, more is always better. So we have lots of options. Okay, There are 4 Pintuck presser feet, and that's in the world of Bernina. Okay, so if you don't own a Bernina, it's okay, because you have Pintuck feet too. I'm sure that every manufacturer in the world out there has a variety of Pintuck feet. The bottom of the feet have grooves in them, okay, and that they are designed to help pull the fabric into the tuck. It's to pinch it. These presser feet, they range in size, so the number of grooves in the presser feet change, resulting in different sizes. So the more grooves in the bottom of the foot, the smaller the pintuck. And they are also designed to work in correlation with a double needle. Okay, so you have to figure out what size pintuck you want, and then you need to use the foot and needle that work together. So I will show you here. So here are the 4 of the 5 presser feet options for Pintucks. Okay, so you'll see that we have a 3 groove, a 5 groove, 7, and a 9. Okay, and each one of those grooves in the bottom there is kind of gives you an idea as to how big the Pintuck would be. Okay, so you can kind of see that the distance between those lighter sections, that's how big your Pintuck would be. Okay, and they get smaller as the number of grooves increases. So typically a 3 groove Pintuck, which is your foot number 30, it corresponds with a 4 millimeter double needle. Okay, and we're going to talk about double needles in a minute, but this would be a 4 millimeter double needle, and this would be the kind of Pintuck that you would want to make with heavier fabric. Okay, and then the 5 groove, okay, as a 3 millimeter double needle and works well with the medium to heavy fabric. And then you have the 7 groove and then the 9 groove. Okay, so there are lots of options. The more delicate the fabric is, the smaller the Pintuck you're going to want, because if you try to take a real lightweight like batiste or rayon and use a 3 groove Pintuck, it's going to happen, but they're going to be floppy. Okay, so they're going to be more like fabric tucks than they will be definitive tucks for your fabric. Okay, now the other presser foot option is 46, and it's 46C. Okay, it's designed to work with both the 5.5 millimeter and the 9 millimeter machines. Okay, it is a clear soled foot. You sew the Pintucks first with this foot. Okay, and then you come back and you put the Pintucks in the grooves, and then it allows you to sew a decorative stitch in between the Pintucks in the same parallel to the Pintucks. A 3 millimeter double needle is the best, the appropriate size needle for this particular foot. So as an example, here you go. So visually, wondering what that is that I'm trying to explain to you is this. So first we go through and we use this foot to make those Pintucks. Okay, and so your Pintucks are these little tucks of fabric that are happening right there. And then after you do your Pintucks, then you come back, you change out to a standard needle, and you realign the tucks in the grooves, and then run your decorative stitches that would be sized appropriately to fit between the Pintucks. Okay, so an additional decorative element too, and you always want to know what you're going to do with all of those presser feet. I mean, all those decorative stitches on your machine. This is what you do with it. Okay, you use all those pretty decorative stitches to put between Pintucks. So we kind of have an idea as to what, maybe you know what fabric we're using, you know what groove foot that you need to have or be using. So let's talk about the needles. So a double needle is exactly what it says. It is 2 needles on 1 shank. Okay, so When you go to put it in your machine, you would put it in your machine just like a standard needle, flat to the back, up as high as it will go, and then off of that comes 2 needles. Double needles are labeled according to size, okay? And those 2 numbers, so for example, on this package, it's a 90/3.0. And that means that the needles are a 90 needle, and 3 millimeters means that is the distance between the 2 needles. Okay? So that's that number, those are those numbers, that's what they're talking about. Okay? So you also need to kind of know on these machines what your stitch width is. Okay? Because if you have a machine that is a 5.5 millimeter stitch width, you're not going to be able to use a 6 millimeter double needle, okay? Because already the double needles are too far apart to clear your stitch plate, okay? So you just want to be careful when you are thinking about that. If you're a 9 millimeter machine in stitch width, you can use all of them, but my 5.5 millimeter machines, we need to make sure that you are aware of your maximum width and what you can do with it, okay? So we can always check the fit. If you don't know, you don't have this chart, you have no idea, grab your double needle and grab a pintuck foot, okay? So you place the needle into the grooves in the bottom of the foot. The needles should be running in adjacent grooves. They should be next to each other, okay? They should not fit into one groove and they should not be in every other groove, okay? If they are not running in 2 adjacent channels, it is not the right needle and foot combination, okay? So you just need, that's a quick way to figure out, I don't remember what needle to use with this foot. You can just turn it over and check the bottom and make sure that it runs in the 2 adjacent grooves, okay? Now, let's talk about how we thread a machine, okay? Because we have 2 needles, that means we need 2 spools of thread, right? Okay, so we have to thread our machine twice. So we're going to stand one spool up and we're going to lay one spool down. For those of you that have multiple spool holders, they can both stand up. For those of you with 8 series machines, they both stand up, but we're going to put 2 spools on the machine, okay? Make sure when you do use your vertical spool pin, okay, that you are using the foam pad underneath of that spool of thread. So your spool pin comes up and the foam pad goes on and then your spool goes on top of that, okay? That is designed to help, 1, allow your spool to sit level, and 2, allow it to spin with reduced friction, and it makes your machine not have to work as hard to unspool that thread, okay? We are going to continue to thread the process of the machine just like you would with single thread, okay? But what changes is when you come to that top tension disc, okay? So right here where this little arrow is as you go down to come back up, okay? There's a little tension disc there. And you can usually, if your presser foot is in the up position, you can usually use your fingernail and it wiggles back and forth, okay? 1 thread goes to the right of that tension disc and 1 thread goes to the left, okay? So here's a close-up for you. So here's that tension disc, okay, right here. And I'm going to put 1 thread to the right of it and 1 thread to the left of it, okay? And then we're going to continue on threading the machine. Just hold both threads. We're going to thread everything like normal for the rest of the way. And then you're going to thread 1 needle into each eye of each needle, okay? Now, your automatic needle threaders are not going to work, okay? So this is a manual thread. Sorry. You have to do it manually. Get out the magnifying glasses if you need. and you'll be able to thread those needles. And then you are going to put your bobbin in and everything will be ready to sew. Okay. The reason we split the tension disc at top is to allow each strand of thread to get even tension versus them both being on one side and kind of sharing the tension, which can cause some looping and things like that. We split them, we divide them, we separate them so that they both can ride through the tension disc without getting twisted and get treated evenly. Okay. Now, we do have some special exceptions. The Bernina 8 series is one, and we do have some security programs for a lot of our Bernina machines out there to help us keep from breaking double needles, okay? Especially if we are working with decorative stitches and a double needle, okay? So first thing first, security programs, okay? My current line machines, my 4, 5, 7s, 8s, you have a needle security program. For my older machines, my 730s, 200s, 630s, 640s, it was a white triangle with a red exclamation point in it, okay? My 580s, 560s, that type of thing. It's a red exclamation point that you would open up and then you would pick needle or plate. So you would open up your needle minder or your needle security and you would tell it what size double needle you are using, okay? That is going to do some math for you, okay? It's not going to allow you to do a stitch width that is wider than the needle and stitch plate are capable of, okay? Now, if you don't have a needle minder, so my 440, 430 owners, my 153s, my 930s, 1008s, and you want to use a double needle, okay, you just have to do a little bit of manual math. I promise it's not hard, okay? So when you're using a double needle, and you don't need to do it so much if you're doing a straight stitch because there's no width to a straight stitch. It's only if you want to use a double needle for a zigzag or a decorative stitch do you need to do this math. You take the maximum width of your machine. So in the world of Bernina, it's either going to be 5.5 or 9. Other manufacturers on the market, also there are some 7 millimeter stitch width machines. I know there's some Burnett's that are 7 millimeters. You subtract the size double needle, okay? And what is left is the maximum width of any decorative stitch you can sew with that double needle, okay? So you have a 5.5 millimeter stitch width machine. You're using a 2.5 millimeter stitch width, 2.5 millimeter double needle. So that leaves you 3, okay? So 3 millimeters is the maximum you can do a decorative stitch on the machine with that double needle, okay? Because double needles can be used for sewing decorative stitches. Straight stitches, zigzags, it's a lot of fun to play with, but sometimes they have to be so small they don't look really well. So you want to experiment and play with it, okay? But by setting your needle minder or doing that little bit of math, you're going to be a little more cautious and careful to not break your needle by setting a stitch too wide. Okay. I have a question. How do you know which stitch works with foot number 46? Any decorative stitch will work with foot number 46. Okay. As long as it's not a sideways motion stitch, as long as it's not in one of those sideways motion stitch folders, any of your 9 or 5.5 millimeter stitch width designs will work with 46. Okay. All right. Now, for my 8 series owners, so 830, 820s, okay, you have some double needle threading. Okay, so you have an upper tension disc that I showed earlier on the machine before, but ours is in a different place for my 8 series owners. Okay, and so right at the top of the machine, usually right above where this middle of the screen is at, there's a little silver tab. Okay, that little silver tab is their tension disc. So again, one on each side of that silver tab, and then thread the rest of the way. The thing to know here is that, again, you're not going to be able to use your automatic threading. Okay, so with my 8 series, as soon as you bring that thread up into that first thread guide, let me get my words here, that usually kicks that sensor that sets your machine up, right? The light comes on down at the needle, but on your screen, you will see usually this little thing that shows you how to thread. And in the lower corner, there is an icon there that shows a hand and a needle. You need to touch this. You touch this little icon, and that's going to tell the machine you're going to manually thread the needles. So you're going to touch that. You're going to finish threading, okay? You're going to then push the needle threading button on the head of your machine. And what's going to happen is that it's going to thread the inside of your machine for you, but your needle threader is not going to swing to the needles, okay? You'll just see it. It'll come down. It'll pop right back up, okay? You don't want it to swing forward and smash into those double needles. So we have to tell the machine to manually thread, because otherwise it won't thread our take-up lever for us, okay? So that is the manual thread icon for my 8 series machines, 820, 830, 880s, okay? There's a whole section in your owner's manual on threading a double needle, and that exactly what you're looking at here on the screen came right out of the owner's manual, okay? The other thing to remember, and this is pretty much for everybody, that at the point of where you would go behind the thread guide here, it's usually good to keep the 2 threads separated in here. So for some of you, you have 2 there. You can go 1 to the left and 1 to the right. Some of you can go behind the wire, 1 thread behind the wire, 1 thread in front of the wire. Or you can put 1 behind in that guide and 1 out of that guide. But at that point of where you go down to the needle, you may want to keep them separated so they don't get further twisted into each other. You're going to need to sew slower, okay? So use your slide speed controls to move down to that slower range, because you are working with 2 needles but only 1 bobbin. Okay, things are a little tighter in tension, so we just want to sew slower, okay, in that aspect. All right. So how do we stitch a pin tuck? So once we've got our needle in, the machine is threaded, our foot is on, we're going to place our fabric underneath of the foot, or you can mark your line that you want to sew first. Typically on a pin tuck, we usually mark the first line, and then every line after that is just done by using the groove in the foot. So I typically pull my thread up to the top before I start, just so I kind of have access to everything, and then you're going to sew like normal. Nothing's changing. You're going to stitch. It's going to pinch the fabric and tuck it as it feeds it into the groove of the foot. Okay. If you are not getting as much tuck as you want, okay, then we need to do some adjustment. But once you run 1, then you can move the foot, place the previously stitched pin tuck into a groove, whether you want them right next to each other, spaced apart, 2 grooves, it's completely your choice, okay? So the example that's being shown here on screen, these are 1 groove apart, so they're not right next to each other in that aspect. So like I was saying, the goal of a pintuck is to get tunneling, okay? And depending upon your fabric, and it's going to depend upon how tight the tension needs to be to really get a good tunnel, okay? You want them to be raised. You want that pucker to kind of happen. But we don't want too much puckering. We don't want it to pull the fabric around the pintuck. So you may need to increase your upper tension, okay? It's not so much the lower tension, but the upper tension you want to increase. And I would test this with scrap fabric and things first that you're planning to make you're planning to make the pintucks out of. So for example, I would have a scrap of this piece here that I would be testing to make sure that I was able to achieve the amount of tucking that I wanted. Question was, do you have to have a seam allowance if cutting the pattern out, adding pintucks? Yes. So you need to accommodate for this little bit of tucking. Typically, what I would do is I would take my fabric and I would trace out the pattern piece onto my fabric so that if this was a full shirt or something along that lines, I would kind of trace it so that I could see where exactly on the pattern piece I wanted it. I would do my pin tucking and then I would lay my pattern piece back on top and cut it out. Do not cut your garment piece out and then pin tuck it, especially if you're going to do a lot of pin tucking because it's going to shrink. Okay, so you need to start out with something bigger and then cut it down. Okay. Okay, so again, a little bit on spacing. Your pin tucks, depending upon these pin tucks that you're seeing here, are right next to each other. Okay, this is a foot number 30. This is the biggest pin tuck foot we have. And these are literally one groove after another, and they are right together. Okay, so just to give you a completely different effect. Now, if you are stitching a pin tuck and you just can't get the look, no matter what you've done with tension or anything along that lines, you just can't really get it to tuck like you want. The definition of your pin tuck is not there. So we do something called a corded pin tuck. Okay. They can be corded or not. It's completely up to you as to what the cording just adds structure and gives it a little bit more definition, okay, to it. So if you really want a pronounced pin tuck, cording may be your option. We use a narrow cord, crochet cotton, pearl cotton, something along that lines. If this garment or this item that you are putting pin tucks in is going to be washed, you need to pre-shrink the cord that you are using as well, okay? Just a little side note. We have a pin tuck cording attachment. My 8 series owners, you receive one of these with your machine. At least my 820 and 830 owners. I'm not sure they're still part of the machine today. But it is a pin tuck cording attachment. It screws into the stitch plate on your machine right there in front as you see in this image, and then the cording comes through the front of it and feeds right in. I will show you in a minute if you don't have a pin tuck attachment, another way that you can use it. Another way you can cord pin tucks without needing this. Now it's not going to work real well if you have bobbin sensors on your machine or if you're an 8 series machine. And this was specifically designed for the 8 series because obviously we can't sew with our bobbin doors open, because if our bobbin doors are open, our bobbin is out. Okay, so there is a way to bypass this with using a hole in your stitch plate, but I'll show you that in a little bit. This is much nicer. This goes on way faster than trying to thread the hole in that stitch plate. Okay, and it also keeps the thread right in front of the foot, exactly where it needs to be for pin tucking. And then all you do is stitch. I typically, with a corded Pintuck, I'll pull 5 to 6 inches and then put my fabric there and then start stitching, okay? And so that I have a tail. And then if this was going to be a garment piece or something, they would be stitched over top of at the end of my piece to secure them so that the cording doesn't come out, okay? Because all the cording is it's caught between the tuck, it's underneath the zigzag and the 2 straight stitches that are happening, okay? They're not actually secured for the most part. I mostly use pearl cotton or crochet cotton, like I said, are the 2 that I use. They just seem to be the right thickness. And typically I use white, but there are other unique techniques that you can do with Pintucks, okay? So one of them is what we call shaped Pintucks, okay? Pintucks are traditionally done in straight lines, one right after another, parallel to each other, okay? But you can stitch a Pintuck in curved lines. You can stitch them in turning corners. You can also stitch them in cross hatches, waves, grids, anything along that lines. Okay? So Pintucks don't have to just be straight. Okay? Does take definitely, if you're going to sew the curved or curvy lines or turned corners, it does take slow sewing, okay, so that you can get good formation of your corners and things like that here as well, okay. All right. Next is a shadowed Pintuck. So shadow Pintucks are using colored cord, okay, to show through your top fabric to give you a shadowed look, okay? And so you can see here, this was a really clear, probably almost an organza sheer fabric that we used pink cord to give this look. This one on the left is linen that was probably a slightly darker yellowy cord underneath, kind of give you just a little more definitive look. Okay, all right. Oh, that's a good idea. Miss Kathy says that she puts a piece of the OESD paper tape on the end once she gets the cord through the attachment. And then that helps keep it from wanting to slide back out of the Pintuck attachment. That's a good idea. I didn't think about that. I just usually really pull a really long cord and hope that I don't keep pulling my fabric back out and end up having to rethread the attachment again. The other thing that I have used Pintucking for is shearing. And so shearing is using elastic thread in the bobbin, okay? And then we use regular thread on top, and then it does that faux smocking. Usually you see a lot of shearing on little girls' summer dresses, just like what you see here. And so we would put elastic thread in the bobbin, colored thread in our double needles, and then stitch our multiple rows of Pintucks. The more rows you do, the closer together, the more shearing or ruffling or gathering that you're going to get. The other thing to remember when you're doing shearing is after you get everything in place and finished, steam it, okay? Steaming the elastic thread will help it return to its original and kind of suck everything in, okay? So that it may not look like much is happening when you are sewing it, but when you add some steam to it, it's just going to suck right back up, okay? So there's lots of information and more information available on Press Your Feet. You can find it for the Bernina. We have our big book of feet, okay? Technique that can be used. I'm going to move my camera here, so just give me 1 second while I get that set before I show you guys. So this has lots and lots of not just Pintuck feet, but all the information that I referred to and techniques are in and covered more in depth in the Big Book of Feet. Do I have questions? So while I talk about how to thread the machine using for cording without having a Pintuck attachment, if you have questions, go ahead and drop them in the box. All the information that I pulled from today came from these links. Now, again, you're not going to be able to click on them right this second, but when the presentation is already posted up on the Material Girls website, it is under the YouTube tab that we have. So give me 1 second and let me find it here. And show you where it's at. Okay. So if you go to the materialgirlsquiltboutique.com, click on YouTube, the YouTube page will pop up on the site. And then if you just arrow down to the bottom, you will find the information that will give all the dates, links to all the videos, and all the presentations in PDF format. And so once it's in PDF format, you can click these and they will open you up to the location. Everything came from Bernina.com or weallsew.com. Okay, that's there as well. I would call quilting cotton medium weight. And I would probably call flannel heavy, and it's going to depend upon the flannel. Okay. Flannel can be medium weight. Some flannel can be lightweight, but I would definitely probably start with flannel being medium to heavy. And quilting cotton itself can be light to medium. So like a solid quilting cotton from like Michael Miller's Cotton Couture, I would definitely lean towards the lightweight cotton side. And Kona cotton, I would definitely lean it more towards medium to heavyweight. Yes, so if you do have the original set of features books, those were the 3 volumes of features. The same information is in them if you have those 3 sets of the original 3 sets. The Big Book of Feet is just an updated all-in-one volume, and the graphics have just been updated, but the same information is there about nothing has changed with Pintuck feet. Okay, they are all still the same. Okay, so let me show you here. Okay, so if you wanted to thread a machine, so let's say you have an Activa, an Aurora, a 153, something along that lines, and you don't have a Pintuck attachment, and those machines don't have bobbin sensors. Okay, so ignore this for the moment. You would take and open up your bobbin door, okay, and then pop your stitch plate off. And you're going to go up from in front of the bobbin, up through the top of the machine, and you're going to come up through the hole in the stitch plate. Okay? So give me 1 second. I'm going to try to make this happen. That's not a good tweezers. Where are my good tweezers? Not where they belong, I can tell you that. Normally I can grab a hold of this. never fails, you know. Totally different when you got 100 sets of eyes. Woo, do not look at that dirt. Holy moly. And then you would thread through the top of your stitch plate. And then you would be ready to pin tuck. Okay? That will then, this little guy, if you have your spool, you can pop your label out. You can run it over your freehand system, okay? So if you have your freehand system, you can run it through here, and then this little guy will stay attached, and as you sew a pin tuck, it just kind of unrolls for you, okay? So that can help in that. Let's see, I should have 46 available. I think there's some hanging out there. I can verify. Yes, you can pin tuck jersey fabric. Okay, you probably want to increase your stitch length slightly just so that you can balance the stretch of the fabric as well. And yes, buy the guide, ladies, buy the guide. It is way less stressful. Oh, yes, I do have good tweezers, and I don't know where they're at right now, and I'm going to have to hunt for them because those tweezers I was using did not come together where they're supposed to come together. All right. So I hope that you found that helpful and you learned something here about pin tucks today. And or just about threading a double needle more than anything. Because that can be a little challenging to use, especially if you don't get it threaded right. You can get one side of your stitching one needle can look great and the other needle can look eh. So make sure that you do split that tension disc at the beginning. Let me go back to something here. So, Miss Jane, you had asked earlier about this cutting a pattern piece. So the link that is in the presentation on the diagonal pin tucking is actually based on this item. And these sections of the garment were cut out as rectangles first. The pin tucks were stitched, and then the pattern piece was laid on top of it and then cut out. Okay, so that kind of a little bit more of a visual as to how this was done. So this was not done with this shape cut out as the front yoke of a shirt. Okay, but that diagonal pin tuck link takes you right to this from the We All Sew website. Okay, well, I hope that everybody has a great weekend, and I appreciate you joining me here this morning, and we look forward to seeing you for Breakfast Club next week, which is a serger technique. We are next Saturday is, what am I doing? Learning about elasticators in sergers. Okay, so we're going to learn about how to put elastic in on your overlockers and sergers. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day, and we will see you soon. Bye.